Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. In today's video we're going to discuss the Winchester Repeating Rifle. This rifle is oftentimes called the Winchester 1866 Golden Boy, but that's a little bit of misinformation. To further explain, I think we should go back to the beginning and start with the Henry Repeating Rifle of 1860. That rifle, as most people know, was developed by Benjamin Tyler Henry for the New Haven Firearms Company. It appeared very similar to this, and during the Civil War was actually called that Yankee rifle that you load on Sunday and shoot all week. In appearance it was similar, but there were some major differences developed by 1866 when Winchester took over the New Haven Firearms Company. The main one was, of course, the Nelson King gate-loaded or side-loading device. Prior to that, the Henry, you had a barrel shroud you rotated out of the way, loaded it from the tube, and your follower, which was an open kind of cut here on the tube, would follow the rounds all the way down until, of course, the rifle was empty. By 1866, the rifle had this wooden forearm, as you can see, another positive advantage for a hot barrel. You didn't need a glove to run it if you were shooting it a lot. The receiver, of course, was fully brass. That hadn't changed. And the interesting thing about the Winchester Repeating Rifle is, once again, people called it the 1866. In fact, Winchester never used a year for their rifle until the 1873 model would come out. You can see where when Winchester would develop a history of calling their model after the year it was released, it would follow that because this came out in 1866 that's what it is. It's really not the case. For those of you who are watching who are still curious about the Winchester Model 1873, I would suggest that you look up a couple of videos from Ian McCollum on forgotten weapons. He has many videos based on the 1873 and covers its entire production run based on barrel lengths, years, and it's a remarkable piece of information for those of you who are more curious about the 1873. One of the major differences between this one and the 73 was, of course, you had no lever safety here. This one does have a little lock to keep the lever from popping open. From a safety perspective, without that lever safety, this gun could potentially fire out of battery, causing you a catastrophic failure, and it will fire unintended, so to speak, meaning if you have bad trigger finger discipline, anything can happen. It's a remarkably beautiful piece of art, in my opinion, and this came out in 3 different size barrel lengths. This is the 19, the shorter version. As time went on, Winchester would make pretty much any barrel length you wanted, and most of theirs were octagonal. This is a reproduction from Uberti, so to keep the cost down, you don't have a brass cap here on your forearm, and of course, no octagonal barrel. But it is a remarkable, sort of cool reproduction of the rifle that truly revolutionized American firearms, at least in my opinion. One of the other major differences between the 1860 66 and then eventually the 1873, of course, is caliber. When the original Henry came out, it was in .44 rimfire. As time went on, the 66 would eventually be morphed into the .44 centerfire or .44 Winchester centerfire. An interesting word about that. At that period of time, the bulk of American firearms were chambered in the .44 caliber. But if you're Colt and you want to use the .44 Winchester centerfire, you don't want to advertise for a rival company, so you would call it something else, which was the .44-40. Because all of those guns at the time used black powder. Of course, it took 40 grains of black powder to get this rifle to do what they wanted it to do, so Colt just simply referred to it as the .44-40. They are one and the same, interchangeable with the .44 Winchester centerfire. This particular copy is actually historically chambered incorrectly. This is in .45 long Colt. which is the preference for cowboy action shooters today because it's more available and somewhat less expensive than 4440. You wouldn't have found this in 1866 in 45 long Colt. It just simply didn't exist. Major difference when the 1873 Winchester came out was your side plates on both sides of the receiver looked different. It was a little bit easier to remove them and get to the action for cleaning and sort of maintenance and oiling if you needed to do that. However, this one, as you can tell, isn't super complex either. You do have to remove the lever to get to the two toggle action, which is another cool feature. Simple, but amazingly revolutionary for the time and actually quite strong. When the 1873 came out, it had a sliding sort of dust cover here. If I close the action, you can see this is all open now to the elements, dirt and debris. You couldn't physically move that up and down with the 1873. The Golden Boy didn't have it, but if you work the action, you can see how the other one would work. Now, significantly with the 73, which we've talked about before on the channel, as soon as you activated the lever, it would move that dust cover out of the way. So it was a little more complex. And you can see here, your firing pin extension, as always, cocks the hammer and down you go. And you could, in fact, put a block on the lever. Interesting feature. So, what I'd like to do is load this guy up and shoot it. I've never fired this rifle before. I actually borrowed this from a friend for today's video, and I'm really interested to see how smooth and accurate the gun would be at ranges out to about 25 yards from somebody that doesn't shoot a lot of lever action rifles, even though I'm desperately trying to get into the cowboy action game. So let's load it up and see how it goes. Loading a lever action rifle is pretty simple, but there are a couple of hacks. One is to leave the back end of the bullet you insert out a little bit instead of trying to push them all into the tube all the way and keeping your fingers out. So you just kind of use one and set it. And you can see I'm just leaving the back of this out. Depending on the length of the barrel, it changed how many rounds you could obviously put in your magazine tube. But for now, we'll just put a few in. We're using our Ammo Incorporated 45 long Colt. Pretty cool. They call it 45 Colt. Somebody's going to troll me for using long Colt, and I know that's not the correct designation, but habits persist. So, geared up here. One of the other interesting features of this rifle is it does have a little bit of a half cock. That's a little bit of a safety feature. So, what ultimately would happen is, if you get to this position though, the only way to ease the hammer down on a live chamber is to, I don't have the chamber live obviously for safety purposes, is to actually press the trigger and keep physical control of the hammer. So, let's see how we do. Steel at 25. Fun, I'm telling you. Of course, empty. You'll notice that the shells during this era ejected straight from the top. It wasn't until much later that the Winchester AE models came out, which was the angle eject. In fact, if you had a wide-brimmed hat back in the time, once you were done shooting, you could sort of tilt your head, and they might spill off onto the ground. Interestingly enough, the 45 Colt, even out of this short-barreled rifle, does have an audible punch at 25 and 15 yards. Definitely a venerable caliber for those that are curious. And I would highly recommend, if you shoot the gun, to save your brass and get into reloading, because it is quite expensive. This example from Ammo Incorporated is $44.99 for 50. So if I were you, I would try to save the brass. Now, I didn't bring anything along to do an accuracy test on the gun. I have a feeling that if you hand loaded, and these particular sights are somewhat adjustable, not an exact science though. My advice would be, in the spirit of being a true rifleman, you will have to know what this does, not only elevation, but windage at a certain distance. The technology back in the day just didn't allow for a lot of adjustments. So to be able to be successful, especially with hunting applications with this rifle, you had to intimately know what happened based on bullet, weight, and of course, range. So I'm just going to try to stay on the same target and see how quickly I can go through the rounds. Maybe our producer can put a clock on it once we get back to the editing part. I don't know. I'm on practice, as you can tell, a little choppy with the lever, but that's a lot of fun. And man, could you burn through some money and ammo with this guy. The Henry Repeating Rifle, when it debuted in 1860, was a monumental leap forward in American firearms. The Winchester Repeating Rifle was the bridge between the 1860 Henry and the rifle that won the West, the Winchester Model 1873. You can see the foundation of what Winchester was trying to accomplish. And I can tell you, if I had to go out west and deal with dangerous game and obviously rampaging Indians, this would have been a remarkable find, and there is no telling how many lives this actually saved. And the other side of that coin, unfortunately, took. An amazing piece of technology, and in its day, even in reproduction form, a remarkably beautiful piece of American firearms history. Thank you, and I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Don't be afraid to like and subscribe.